Okay, thank you. I couldn't get myself unmuted. Let me go ahead and share. All right. So thank you for the introduction, Amy. My name is Vanessa. As Amy mentioned, I work at the JC Near in Southern Ocean County, Tuckerton, New Jersey. And today I'm going to share some of the great tools that we have here in New Jersey to help us understand our coastal hazard risks and to document changes along the coastline. Specifically, flooding is the focus of what I'm going to be talking about today. Quick little background on my reserve and why I'm here to talk about this. We're part of a network of 29 national estuary and research reserves. And the main focus of the coastal training program at the reserve is to build resilience to coastal hazards, specifically flood risk. This is a little map of our land down in Southern Ocean County, and you can see that it's somewhat of a puzzle of different types of ecosystems and different land management agencies. And since Hurricane Sandy, the main focus of the coastal training program, which I lead, has been resilience to coastal hazards, which, as many of you are aware, coastal resilience is now also a focus of many groups across our region, across the state, nationally, and internationally. One thing I like to point out whenever I give these talks is that when we talk about coastal New Jersey, it's much more than just the Jersey Shore or the Atlantic Ocean front. Everywhere highlighted in blue on this map is considered coastal by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and it's basically showing any municipality that has a tidally influenced waterway. And so when we talk about coastal New Jersey, it's really much more than the shore. But regardless of where you are in coastal New Jersey, one of the hazards you face is flooding. This is a photo from Surf City in Long Beach Island in October 2018. On the right is a picture I stopped and took on my way to work one morning. And on the left is just the Google Street View of that same street. And this is what we call sunny day flooding. You can note that the skies are clear, it's not raining, and the water is not coming from an adjacent waterway. Of course, we have water on all sides of us on a barrier island, but it's not like water has overrun banks and flooded this street. So what is happening here? Where does the water come from? Flooding can occur for a variety of reasons, but tidal flooding specifically occurs because each day there's too high and too low tides. And during the tides, water flows from the ocean as the tide rises and into the bay. The storm drains that we have on our streets, like you see in this diagram, are intended to carry rainwater away from the roads and out into the bay. The problem is, as sea level rises and the high tides become higher, that tide water backs up into the storm drains, and you can see it starting to come up the pipe in the diagram. And if we have an especially high tide, it can come right up through those storm drains and flood the streets. And that's what we see happening in that photo that I showed on the last slide. If you add a storm surge on top of that, something like Sandy, we have the water actually coming over the bulkhead or the shoreline and flooding much more significantly. Of course, water can also come from rainstorms. If there's a rainstorm and a high tide at the same time, there's just nowhere for the water to drain. But eventually, as the tide goes down, the rainwater can drain out. And so we also see flooding in that way. So a lot of times, the big question for people is flooding really getting worse? You hear people say it's always flooded in our coastal areas. And of course, that's true. So the answer to this question is yes, it's getting worse, but it's complicated. Sea level is rising, and so flood levels and the frequency of flooding is increasing in association with that. Development in coastal areas, most of them at least, is also increasing. And so stormwater runoff becomes worse as we put more impervious surface in our developed areas. There's nowhere for the water to drain. It has to run off to those storm drains in the streets, and so they're overloaded. But at the same time, a lot of coastal communities are making improvements to their infrastructure to reduce flooding. So they're raising roads. They are putting valves on those storm drains so the water can't back up into the street. And so in some places, we might see flooding getting better than it's been in the past as the communities make these changes. And so the answer to this question is, in some locations, yes, but in other locations, no. But we do know that sea level is rising, and the way we know that is because we can measure it. This is a graph of the tide level at the Atlantic City tide gauge. It's the oldest operating tide gauge in our state. This is a picture of it over on the left. It's a physical tide station, and the graph shows the tides continuously from 1911, when it first started operating, until now. And so we see this steady rise over time, and it's showing that the water level has risen about 4 millimeters a year over the last century, for a total of 1.35 feet. And so the result is that when it does flood, water levels are higher, and water levels get to flood level more often because of this sea level rise. And so a lot of times, when we talk about climate change, there's a sense of, opinion or uncertainty. But as far as sea level rise, this is one thing where we don't have to argue about it, because this tide station is just measuring the level of the water every day. And so we know concretely that it's gone up this much over the past century. Now, the rate of increase over the next 100 years, that's where we start to have some uncertainties. And I think Joe is probably going to talk a little bit about that in his presentation. But we know that it's risen this much in the past. And so what are we doing about it? Well, we're trying to be resilient, and we have this somewhat of a buzzword, coastal resilience, that you've probably heard. It describes the actions the government and residents are taking to be more prepared for the impacts of sea level rise and other coastal hazards like hurricanes, storms. And the idea is that if we take action now, in advance of future risks, we'll be more prepared to survive and thrive in the face of these changes. So it's not just bouncing back after a storm, but we like to think of it as bouncing forward, taking action proactively so that after an event, we'll be even better off than we were before. But building coastal resilience is somewhat of a puzzle. One of the reasons is that our coastline is very diverse. I showed you that map with the blue areas. So we're talking about all different types of municipalities across the state, making up this resilience puzzle. And the coastline itself is a very dynamic place. So there's a lot of moving pieces when we talk about working on coastal resilience. One aspect is all the different parts of a community. So when we talk about whole community resilience, I always talk about, I don't know what organization has that saying that you're only as fast as your slowest teammate or something like that, or only as strong as your weakest player. I think resilience is like that as well. Whole community resilience depends on the resilience of all these different sectors you see in this graphic. So you need your businesses, your economy to be resilient. You need your ecology, your environment to be resilient, your infrastructure, your residents, et cetera, and so on. And so connecting the science of coastal hazards with communication is one of the critical first steps in bringing all these sectors together. And that's the focus of my work and the rest of my presentation today. So what can you do about coastal flooding as a resident of a coastal area or a resident of New Jersey? The first step is really to know your surroundings and accept that change is happening. And that our behaviors must change in response to that change. And when I say accept change, I don't mean climate change. I just mean natural environmental changes, the dynamic nature of coastal environments. This is an aerial photo of the southern end of Long Beach Island, and I apologize for the LBI heavy photos, but that's where I'm from, and so that's where I have a lot of pictures of. But what you see here, if you look way back at the developed area of the island, it's much further seaward, it's much further to the right side of the picture than this spit of sand at the southern end in the foreground of the picture. And what's happening here is over time, the undeveloped part of the island is actually moving landward towards towards the mainland. And that's what barrier islands do. In the absence of human intervention, barrier islands migrate landward over time as storms push the sand from the ocean side up across the island and over to the bay side. And I think this photo is just a really good depiction of how dynamic the coastal environment is. This is specific to barrier islands, but mainland areas are dynamic too. And, you know, we've made the decision to hold the land in place where it's developed. We put sand on the beach, we put bulkheads along the bay side, but that is a decision. And we have to make those types of decisions to continue living as we are in coastal areas. So it's about recognizing that the impacts of coastal change and coastal hazards are happening now, not sometime in the distant future, which is sometimes how we think when we think of climate change or sea level rise. And recognizing that the environment is changing is important because sometimes we have the tendency to look back when we're planning for coastal resilience. We look back to Sandy, we look back to what we've experienced in the past. But in the case of flooding and sea level rise, we really do have to look forward to the future. And fortunately, in New Jersey, we have great science that can inform that forward-thinking decision-making. For me and my work, communication of the science is what is key. And that's where my role lies at the Jacques Cousteau Reserve. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk to you about some of the tools we have that you can use and get involved in the coastal resilience work that we do. The first one of these is a web-based platform called MyCoast. And by a web-based platform, I'm just using fancy words for a website and a smartphone app. And you can use MyCoast either way. We run this program in partnership with the New Jersey Coastal Management Program, which is run by the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. And the purpose of MyCoast is to collect photos of changing coastal environments, specifically flooding. And we really envision it to be, as time goes on, the go-to public tool for documenting flooding in all of New Jersey's coastal areas. So whether it's rivers or bays or oceanfront places. And then we also hope that by taking photos of flooding that people see in their own neighborhoods, we're really empowering them to be able to connect these coastal places where we live or work or play with real life potential flood impacts. Because that's really the first step to raising that awareness and accepting that change. And then ultimately, that's when we can start to work on actions that decrease flood risk, which is the ultimate goal of our work. So how MyCoast works. You take a picture with your phone, although you could take it with a camera too, if you're still doing that. And then they pull in background data about the tide and the weather at the time of that photo. And it compiles a little report that can be used to inform decisions. This is a picture of what the MyCoast app looks like on your phone. If you go to your app store, whether you have an iPhone or an Android phone, you'll see just one MyCoast app. Depending on where you're using the app, it will automatically bring you to that state's correct platform. So MyCoast is used in I think we're the 10th or 11th state actually to have MyCoast. And so you just download the app, and then because of where you are, it'll know which tools to give you. So this image on the left shows you what the home screen will look like. You are able to look at the tide. So that's the first thing you see. You're able to change what tide station that your phone will tell by this use nearest button. I set it to Townsend Inlet, but I am an LBI. So if I were to check use nearest, I could open up a list of closer tide gauges and choose it, and it would give me this tide graph for whichever one I choose. And so even if I'm not using it to take pictures, if I just want to know what the tide is, this is a really quick and easy way to get tidal information. The second function, and really what it's for, is using this add report button to take a photo of flooding in your area. And so if you hit add report, it brings you to this screen on the right. And we right now have two what they call tools. They're like photo collection categories in New Jersey. One is high water, so that's the pictures of flooding that I've been talking about. And the other is for collecting pictures of places we love. And the reasoning behind that is we wanted there to be one, a positive use of this tool, not only taking pictures of bad things like flooding, but also once we have this repository, both of valued coastal places that people love and places where coastal flooding, we can put these two databases together and start to see what areas we should be focusing on. If we have a place people love and it's flooded there, then that's some place we're going to want to give attention to take measures to reduce flooding. You also can change your state. You'll see there's a little drop down here. It's set to New Jersey automatically if you're in New Jersey, but if you, had gone on vacation, say to South Carolina, and you got some pictures there, and when you got home you wanted to upload them, you could change to South Carolina and add pictures like that. This blue menu is the main menu that you get to by clicking this little icon in the top left with the little waves. And what I wanted to show you is, again, this has a use beyond the photos, which is tide information. I know there's a lot of different apps where you can get tide charts and your daily tides, but MyCoast can be that as well. So if you go to the blue icon, opens up your list of functions. And if you hit daily tide data, you get a tide chart for whatever tide station you have focused or you have set your app to. This is just showing you what the MyCoast tool looks like if you decide to use it on your computer. You can just take photos and then come home to your computer and upload them through the website. This is the URL right here on the left. The same two tools for submitting photos, and also the same tide station function where you can get your local tides. So if you go into the website, you can actually look at all the photos that people are submitting. This is the Places We Love page where we have this map showing where all the photos have been taken, and then a live stream of the most recent photos submitted. The high water page looks just the same for the flooding photos. You can see that we have a lot more photos on this photo collector category though. And if you want to look at the actual reports for these photos, you can click on any one of the photos in the live stream. You can also zoom in on the map and get to it that way. This is what the report looks like that the website automatically generates. So you take your photo and it pulls in that extra data that I mentioned. So tide data, weather data. And that's what you see here. It tells you how close to high tide you were when the picture was taken. It tells you the wind, temperature, how much rainfall there's been. And also note that it gives you a riverine overview, which is from a river water level gauge. And that's just, I wanted to point that out that, again, this is not just for ocean or bayfront places. It also is for tidal river areas. And when you upload your photo, you get the option to put in the source of the flooding. So whether it's bay, ocean, or a river or stream, and you get the option to put in the cause of the flooding. And you can select more than one. You can put in high tide, rain, or storm surge. One thing new that we have added is this view on flood mapper option. And this is going to bring us over, if we click it, to the NJ Flood Mapper tool. And so this tool, this is the second tool that I wanted to talk about today. It's an online mapping tool for visualizing flood hazards. And I will show you in just a minute the different types of flood hazards you can use. But in this case, I clicked on the link in MyCoast, and so it brought me right to the map showing the location of the photo on the ground. And it's one of these two right here. I can't remember. And so one thing we have done, if you click on the icon, you can see your photo there. So there's the photo that we saw. Here it is on the ground. We have the real life location. When you come to Flood Mapper through that MyCoast link, the View on Flood Mapper link, we automatically have added a small selection of extra data that could be of interest. So critical facilities like hospitals, fire stations, hurricane evacuation routes, just because it's good to know where those things are in relation to flooded areas. If you can't see any of those right now because we're so far zoomed in, but if I was to zoom out now in the middle, we see where that photo was, and we start to see the other icons on the map. So for fire departments, and I think the little orange dots are evacuation shelters. What we haven't automatically added here, well, there's a lot we haven't automatically added, and I encourage you to go to floodmapper.org and check out all the different functions of this tool and investigate where you live. Under this map layers button, there's all sorts of different data that you can add to the map. But what we haven't added specifically and by choice is any sort of water level to this map. And so if I want to do that, what I do is go to flood hazards, I click that button, and it gives me this menu of different flood hazards that I can add. In this case, I chose 2 feet of sea level rise, and I hit add, and that added it to the map. And that's this blue area you see now. It's showing me the level of inundation on the land if there was 2 feet sea level rise, or it could be 2 feet storm surge. Basically, if water levels are 2 feet higher than the normal high tide. And so now I can zoom back in to the location of my photo. Here's that icon again that we were looking at before. And I actually see that these flooded areas are where there's photos is lining up with where the map shows that there would be inundation on the roadways with 2 feet of sea level rise. And so the idea here is now I'm getting not just this map. Many of you have probably seen these types of maps before where they show you where there would be flooding under different water levels. But now I can actually look at a real life on the ground picture of flooding. Now, note that the water level in this photo is not necessarily the 2 feet that I have on the map. And that's why we didn't choose a water level for you to automatically have loaded, because we didn't want to suggest that we know how much water is on the ground in these photos. But it starts to paint the picture. It's a lot more, what would be the word I'm looking for, but I lost the word, but you really feel something when you see the photo in association with this map with blue on the roads, right? Rather than if you're just looking at an inundation map. So I would encourage you to go to Flood Mapper, go to MyCoast. You can get there either through MyCoast or going to this URL that you see at the bottom of the screen. I just have this zoomed out here so that you can see how all the MyCoast photo locations are appearing on the Flood Mapper map. So you can explore, zoom into your neighborhood, see what's there, and check that out. Last, I want to tell you about a couple things that are coming soon with MyCoast. One of those is King Tide photo contests. Last spring, we did one in May, and we got about 50 or 60 photos submitted from all over the coastal areas of New Jersey. And we're planning to continuing to do those. So this spring, keep your eye out on our social media and on our email list for a King Tide photo contest a little later in the spring. And another thing that's coming up this year is the addition of MyCoast photo stations in various coastal areas throughout the state. These pictures are from a similar effort in Delaware, where they have a little station where you put your cell phone right on this little surface. And so over time, we're getting photos of the exact same location, the exact same angle. And so over the years, as more and more people take photos, you can paint a picture of how the shoreline is changing or how flooding is changing in an area. So that's something we'll be partnering with municipalities and parks to start to install throughout this year. And that is it for me.
Great, thank you so much, Vanessa. So we have just a couple quick questions before we get on to Joe's presentation. There was a question if we can use this in Camden and if it would show the combined sewer overflow areas.
So so part one, yes, you can definitely use it in Camden. Camden is a coastal area. I I'm not sure if the CSO areas are one of the pieces of data in Flood Mapper. I will check that while Joe is presenting and put it in the chat.
Great, thank you. And another question was, many communities in Barnegat Bay, Delaware Bay watershed are building living shorelines. Are there any long-term studies of the living shorelines and the help that they are supposed to be doing related to flooding?
There are, living shorelines have gotten more and more popular in the past decade or so, and so getting that longitudinal evidence of how well they're working has taken some time, but there are a lot of reports at this point that speaks to the effectiveness of living shorelines. I'm happy to pull some of those together, and we could share them by email maybe after the presentation.
Excellent, thank you. And the presentation will be made available to folks on our recording. So, okay, do you need any volunteers to help with the Coastal SNAP project?
Very likely, yes. We'll want volunteers either, if you're just a citizen and you are looking to get involved to help install or suggest locations for one of the stations, we definitely would welcome that. And then if you are a municipal representative, we are looking for areas where you might want a station. So that would be great to know as well. But we are just kind of in the very initial conversations with our partners at DEP about these. So I'll have more information and more concrete ways to get involved as time goes on.
All right, excellent. Okay, well, we'll be able to take more questions if you think of more for Vanessa, but let's move on to our next guest, to Joe Martucci. And Joe is going to talk about the Rutgers report on rising seas and coastal storms in terms of its impact on the Jersey Shore, and also to discuss the community rating system for flood insurance. So if you don't know Joe, he's been the meteorologist for the Press of Atlantic City since 2017. He's the only full-time meteorologist employed by a New Jersey newspaper. So he is keenly aware of the issues of sea level rise, especially for our tourist economy at the Jersey Shore. Joe is a New Jersey native and focuses on helping the community understand how weather impacts our daily lives. He has daily video and written weather reports and an award-winning bi-weekly podcast discussion of the state's foremost weather and climate experts are part of that. So he's the newspaper scientist and covers a wide range of environmental topics, using a lot of data to approach the true impact of issues like coastal flooding on our economy. So he's got a lot of awards from the New Jersey Press Association and has been featured in the New Yorker and The Deadliest Catch. So Joe, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks, Amy, and great talk by Vanessa as well. And I think I'm going to kind of piggyback off what she was saying, talking about coastal flooding, why it happens, and we'll talk more into the numbers of it. How much sea level rise have we seen? I know Vanessa talked about that. I'll elaborate on that in a little bit, talk about some projections here, and then we'll talk about the community rating system, which has been really helpful for towns along the shore when it comes to protecting the shore and by extension, saving some money in your wallets here by getting discounts on your FEMA flood insurance. So starting off with where we are at this point, kind of a time check on our sea level rise. Since 2000, we've seen about 0.2 of a foot of sea level rise. And when you take that into consideration and what Vanessa was saying before, you project out forward and you see, a South Jersey or a Jersey Shore, I should say, that is going to flood more often if we're not doing anything about it. So Rutgers has this scientific and technical advisory report that they put out in 2019 and really is kind of like the Bible for sea level rise data and information. And, one of the things I always like to say when I do a talk, because either the question will come to me or I'll just say is, well, Joe, what do you think about climate change and sea level rise? And I said, climate change isn't a religion. You don't believe in it or not. There are facts, and what you choose to do about those facts is where your beliefs come in. So my job is to tell you what's going on and what are the forecasts at this time, similar to my job as a meteorologist. So over the last 40 years, New Jersey has really been a hotspot for coastal flooding compared to the whole earth. On average, we rose about 8.2 inches from 1979 to 2019. And when you compare it to the global mean sea level rise, that was about 4.3 inches. So we almost are rising at a rate double of the Jersey Shore now, or excuse me, of the rest of the world. Now, why are we seeing that? And Vanessa tapped into that before. The Rutgers staff report actually does break this down into to their best beliefs what is driving a lot of the sea level rise. The majority of it is actually not from anthropogenic climate change, meaning the majority of it isn't from us increasing our methane and carbon production into the sky. That has a good role into this. About 40% of it is driven by that, but 60% is due to factors outside of that. Things such as our land is just naturally sinking regardless of the sea levels rising. I'm not extremely well versed in that topic, but it's something to do with the aquifer that most of the pinelands sits on, and by extension, we're at the shore, we're right next to that. So we sink a little bit there. We also are seeing a little bit more with the buildup along the shore, causing some more of this sea level rise, as well as Vanessa was saying. So between 2000 and 2030, coastal areas are likely to see a sea level rise of a half foot to 1.1 feet. And they actually put this really nice chart that breaks it down by the year, by the percent likelihood of it happening in the emission scenario. What's important to know is that between now and 2050, pretty much everything is baked in when it comes to sea level rise. Doesn't matter how little or how much, carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases we're putting into the air. It's pretty much set in stone. So there's an 83% likelihood of sea levels rising a half foot by 2030, and then 9/10 of a foot by 2050, compared to where we were in the year 2000. And we rose about 2/10 of a foot since then. So you can kind of subtract the math here, and you could say, well, we're going to rise another 3/10 of a foot by 2030 and another 7/10 of a foot by 2050, thereabouts. Now, once you get past 2050, that's when the impacts of anthropogenic climate change come into play. And it depends on our emission scenario. So I'm not going to toss you out 5,000 numbers here. I just want to kind of pick a couple that I think drive home the point. And I'm going to use that 83% likelihood because I want to tell you something that's more than likely going to happen. So there's an 83% likelihood of sea levels rising 1.4 feet by the year 2070 in a moderate emission scenario. If it's a high emission scenario, it's 1.5 feet. If it's a low emission scenario, it's 1.3 feet. So you see, not really much. It's still kind of baked in our sea level rise, even through 2070, depending on what kind of emission scenario we're on. Now we start to diverge when we get to 2100. So by 2100, in a low emission scenario, it's 1.7 feet. The forecast is as high as 2.3 feet, and that's an 83% likelihood. Now, when it comes into the policy part of this, and I'll go off on a side note on this real quick, the New Jersey DEP put out a report last year for the Jersey Shore and how to mitigate against coastal flooding, the policy part of the climate change that we're in. And they are going off of a 17% likelihood in a moderate emission scenario of 5.1 feet of sea level rise by 2100. The NJDEP has plans to raise the base flood elevation for houses to be built by 5 feet, going off of that number. So that's an instance of we have the data. Now policymakers are taking that data and implementing policy with it. And that's where you can agree or disagree with it. But those are the numbers that we're looking at. when you think about the Jersey Shore, we're obviously thinking of some of our biggest storms that we had, Sandy being one of them. It is the 60th anniversary of the Ash Wednesday storm in 1962. And we also have the hurricane of 44. In a climate changing world, we're actually not expected to see more tropical systems. However, the potential for more intense tropical systems has and will continue to be an issue. So, are we going to see more storms at the Jersey Shore as a result of climate change with our hurricanes and tropical systems? Not necessarily, but the potential for something stronger to be there is certainly there. And Sandy was not even our reasonable worst case scenario with a tropical system. Their emergency managers typically are preparing for a Category 3 hurricane impact when it comes to that reasonable worst case scenario for us at the Jersey Shore. Sandy was about it was a post-tropical cyclone, and that's a whole nother story. But essentially, Sandy was about a Category 1 system by the time it made landfall. Projecting outward with our coastal flooding, how much we're expected to see and where we're at right now. Between 2007 to 2016, there were an average of 8 high tide flooding events in Atlantic City. And in the 1950s, there were 1. So it's an 8-time increase between the recent period we just came out of, 2007 to 2016, to the 1950s. That's just the most recent forecast point we have. There's an 83% chance. Again, that 83% chance is used as the top end of the likely range. 83% chance we see 17 high tide flooding events by 2030. So just 8 years from now in Atlantic City. That number jumps to 45 by 2050. And then by the time we get to 2100, based on the emissions scenario, it is more than likely that assuming we don't do anything to mitigate the coastal flooding, 170 to 290 days of high tide flooding in Atlantic City by 2100. Again, we can mitigate for this, we can prepare for it, but this is just the numbers that we're seeing given the current state of affairs. Now in Cape May, just to read off those numbers for you there, 13 high tide flooding events is the projection by 2030 in a likely scenario, 40 by 2050, and then 170 to 300 days by 2100. Again, based on the emission scenario. So 2100, long ways away, 78 years from now. I'm hoping I'm still alive by then. We'll see. But even if I'm not, we're looking for a lot more coastal flooding by 2100 specifically here. So towns have been incentivized by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association, to mitigate against this coastal flooding. And FEMA has said with the towns, hey, if you can do work to protect against coastal flooding, we will give you discounts on the National Flood Insurance Program. There's over 1,500 communities nationwide that participate. New Jersey has a good number of those, being, as Vanessa was saying, a lot of our towns is in that tidal flooding zone, and even places that are along rivers that aren't tidal based are a part of this. Just to give you a breakdown of how this works, there's 18 different credible activities organized under a few different factors like public information, mapping and regulations, flood damage reduction, and flood preparedness that go into this point system. And depending on the number of points, you get a certain amount of percent off your flood insurance discount. So if you have a level 10, that's 0% off your federal flood insurance. And I have to apologize if you can hear that car. I don't know what's going on outside my window, but someone's car alarm went off. So I apologize for that. But a level 10 gives you 0. You go all the way up to a level 1 and you get 45% off. It is very hard to get a level 1 or level 2, but it starts to become more common when you get to level 4, 5s, and 6s. So I just wanted to run off a couple of different towns and what classes they're in and what percent off they're getting. Greenwich, well, I'll start off with some Ocean and Cape May towns here. Linwood is a class 7. That's a 15% discount. Cape May Point is a class 6. That's a 20% discount. Ocean City is a class 4. That's a 30% discount. And then there are actually 2 towns in our region in Cape May County that have a level 3. And there's only about 15 towns in the entire country out of 1,500 that have a level 3. Those are the neighboring towns of Sea Isle City and Avalon. They're in an arms race And I know they're in a little bit of an arms race to get up as high as they can into their community rating system. So they both have level 3s, and they both enjoy 35% discounts on their flood insurance in 2020. That meant residents in Avalon saved $1.6 million on their flood insurance. It gets really, really hard to get from a level 3 to a level 2. I know Avalon is working on it, but there are some things that some towns just can't even achieve just because of where they're located. Your level 2 and level 1 towns, a lot of them are actually based away from the coast. Because, and I'm not an expert in this, but based on the way that you can accumulate points, it's a little bit easier to accumulate points if you're away from the oceans and from the Gulf of Mexico. But it's a great program. I always like to track it here. They update their rankings twice a year, once in April, once in October. No updates for us in New Jersey with our April update, but hopefully we can get some increases in our class rating as we go forward into October. So with that being said, thanks everybody for listening. More than happy to take questions that you do have here. And I want to thank Amy again for coordinating this along, and thank you to Vanessa as well for a great talk in the first half here. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Joe. We have just a couple questions for you, and maybe we'll get some more as we're chatting now. Oh, there was a request to if you could share your sources with us for the.
Sure. I can share, if you give me 1 second, I can share that Rutgers staff report. We can check that out. I can share the community. Here's the community rating system. I got you on 2 screens here. So I'll do CRS flood insurance rating. I'm going to type this into the chat.
Great.
That's right there. And the sea level rise, I'm going to write the Rutgers staff report is here. That Rutgers staff report's super interesting. I mean, it's huge. It's 56 pages long, and there's a lot of numbers in there. I dig through this. I even try just to, every once in a while, just skim through a new section and try to figure out what's going on with all these numbers. But it's a great resource. It's something that I use frequently. And actually, just to go back to that sea level rise, if I can, Amy, do I got another minute?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to break down that sea level rise that we've seen so far and where it's coming from. This is on page 14, if you want to check out that Rutgers staff report. So in New Jersey, we've seen 1.9 inches of sea level rise per decade between 1993 and 2017. About 0.5 of, or excuse me, about 0.8 of that is due to anthropogenic climate change things, such as the water's just expanding because warmer water is bigger than colder water. It thermally expands, glaciers melting, the Greenland ice sheet melting, as well as the Antarctic ice sheet. That all adds up to about 0.8 or 0.9 of that 1.9 total sea level rise. The rest is due to natural adjustments in our land. Again, sinking land and other subsidence of the land accounts for the rest of that. So that's where you get those numbers from.
Great. Thank you. And another question was, are we now, since we pay closer attention to the news, and we have more data immediately available to us from meteorologists like you, Joe, does this have anything to do with us being, are we just more aware of what's happening with flooding versus what was happening back in the 1960s?
That's I think it's a heavy question. I think Vanessa might be able to chime in and help out a little bit here. Maybe I'll call her in, but I think it's a combination of, we're more aware of it, but I think it also has to do with the infrastructure of the shore. Another thing I'll say is, there's a reason why barrier islands are called barrier islands. They're really to protect the mainland. And there is some natural shifting of our islands. But, obviously we can't necessarily shift our infrastructure with the shifting islands. So that all has something to do with it. But again, we have the opportunity to mitigate this coastal flooding as well. And it's not like we don't, we do. In Atlantic City, we have the Baltic Avenue Canal, which reopened 2 years ago. I think if it wasn't 2, it was like 3 or 4 years ago recently, which helps to drain out water. So, that helps, but there's all things that go into, I think it's really complicated. I don't know if Vanessa, if you want to chime in and say anything else there, but that's what I got. Oh,
Okay.
sorry. I summoned her and she was muted.
So I was actually looking for answers to other questions that I had gotten, and I did not hear what the question was. Can you tell me?
Yeah, the question was, why I believe, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, why are we seeing more coastal flooding now compared to the 1950s? And the note to that was, are we just more aware of it? And I was talking about infrastructure, kind of like the photo you were showing of LBI with, the land shifting towards the mainland and, human development.
Yeah, obviously there's way more impervious surface since the 1950s. Most of our coastal areas, well, I won't say most, but many of them, whereas once we had little 2-bedroom cottages, we now have 10-bedroom mansions and an entirely paver yard and driveway. So all that water that was once just soaking into the ground is now washing out into the streets. And the stormwater systems are overloaded. Same way over time, because of development like that, towns have had to upgrade electricity and roadways to make them wider. It's kind of like the stormwater upgrades are lacking in a lot of places, and so that's why we see more flooding. And certainly there's places where it always did flood, but now when you see it flooding every single week or every single month, it's just more often than it used to be in those low-lying areas.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
There was another question. Municipalities that are updating their master plans are now required to include a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment, including build out analysis and hazard prone areas. Would it be useful for these towns to map the sea, land, and overland surges from hurricane extents for Category 3 storms, if that's the most reasonable worst case scenario?
Yeah, I believe so. I know Cape May County just did their hazard mitigation plan last year, I believe, and I believe most towns and municipalities are on the same 5-year cycle, where it might have been last year it had to be submitted. But I do know, speaking with various EMs, in particular Jim Eberwine, who some of you might know here, South Jersey weather legend, and he is the emergency manager for Absecon. He says that's always what he tells towns to prepare for, being that he was a meteorologist, is still a meteorologist, retired meteorologist, and now works in emergency management. I would say Category 3 is certainly a reasonable scenario. I think it would be tough to get a Category 3 hurricane with a sandy track, meaning a track going from east to west, but something like an Irene track or a track that we saw during Isaias 2 years ago are certainly I think are fair game for those kind of storms to come here.
Great. Okay. And thanks, Vanessa, for posting some links on the master plan requirement. Another question, can in-ground swimming pools impact underground water storage capacity and cause flooding?
Oh, you know what? I don't know that one. I can't say. I guess it would depend on how deep the pool is, but I'm not well versed in that. I apologize.
All right,
Vanessa?
here's another. Okay, good question. This is maybe, can you explain a little more about the king tides and when the next one would be? When do they occur?
You want to take that
sure.
one? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go.
No, you got it. Go ahead. You got it.
Okay, so king tides are the term we use to describe the highest high tides of the year. They typically occur in the spring and the fall, and it's when the sun, the earth, and the moon are all aligned in a straight line. And Joe is a scientist, can maybe explain why this happens, but it does an abracadabra with the gravitational pull of
Yeah,
those
that's
three
exactly what
bodies.
Yeah.
and it creates a much higher and a much lower tide than normal. And so you'll see more flooding, and sometimes it can be a foot or more higher than what the normal high tide would be. The next one for this spring is, I think, in mid-May, I want to say. They usually last for a few days. It's like May 15th through 19th or something like that.
Yeah, it's usually, I would say, I think May is pretty good. Yeah, just to follow up, I mean, king tides occur during a perigean spring tide. So that's when the moon is closest to the earth. It kind of pulls on the earth a little bit more and creates those tides. The moon doesn't have a perfectly spherical orbit around the earth, just like the earth does not have a perfectly spherical loop around the sun. We're actually further away from the sun during our summertime, and we're closer to the sun during our wintertime. And there would actually be a difference in our climate if the roles were reversed, given that we have much more land in the northern hemisphere than the southern hemisphere. So just a little follow-up on
that. Do you have a source for the category 3 being the most reasonable worst case scenario storm?
Do I have I don't have a source, but I will tell you if you I could point you in the direction of emergency managers who could tell you that if you were interested in that.
Okay. And Alicia mentioned, so it's not as much anthropogenically caused flooding, but we are experiencing it more due to the natural increase of flooding happening and increases in impervious surfaces from development.
Well, I think what's important to note is that it's a relatively even split. It's about 40% like anthropogenic, like pure anthropogenic climate change. That's still a big amount. But 60% is due to other factors here that we have to be aware of. So, to answer your question directly, yes, it has more to do with natural, but this isn't a big, 80-20 or 90-10 split. We're talking about a 60-40-ish split here. So they both kind of work, hand in hand on this.
And for someone who's just trying to kind of wrap their head around the community rating system for flood insurance, can you just really kind of summarize how the system is determined?
Sure. Yeah, it's based on 18 credible activities, and they're organized under these different subcategories: public information, mapping and regulations, flood damage reduction, and flood preparedness. Not all of these activities are actual projects that are brick and mortar projects. A number of these revolves around paperwork and adjusting the paperwork for different plans. Like, okay, if this is going to happen, we are going to do this. That will get you points. So a number of it's paperwork and adjusting for plans. Some of it has to do with the actual hard infrastructure. I don't know exactly what that split is because I tried to look through the point system and it's pages and pages and pages long. But that's a brief overview of that.
That's a very helpful summary. Thank you. So, so I don't know that we have any more questions right now, but I'm sure that, as people think about this and as people watch the recording later, there may be more questions. So if it's all right, we'll include your contact information for people to follow up with both of you, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay. Terrific. Well, anybody else have any burning questions? All right. Well, we can't thank you enough. You've really done a fantastic job, both of you, in sharing with us what's happening and how we can contribute to data collection and just becoming more aware and helping to raise awareness in our communities. So thanks so much. And thank you, Steve, for getting this all set up.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. And thanks to everybody for coming out. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Well, take care. And again, thanks.